So we talked before about what we can learn from observation, and this can indeed be an important method of social research. Watching people scientifically in their everyday lives we call field research, or ethnography, writing, graphy, about culture, ethno. Just letting people do their own thing in a natural setting will hopefully show us natural behavior. So if your research question was if there's any truth to the stereotype that women are worse drivers than men, you might set up on a busy street corner and observe people driving. To avoid confirmation bias, such as labeling aggressive driving by women reckless and aggressive driving by men assertive, we set up an operational definition of bad driving. We list specific behaviors we'll always label the same way, such as running red lights, turning without a turn signal, and looking at cell phones, and note every time we see those behaviors. Then, whether it was a man or a woman or unclear. This would give us a limited sample of quantitative data, how many women versus how many men making these bad driving actions. However, that kind of observation doesn't give you much Verstehen, understanding of the reasons behind their actions. To get more qualitative data on what people are doing and why, ethnography often means in-depth participant observation, actively taking part in the lives of our subjects. Microsociologists learn a lot by getting to know individuals within a community in their daily lives. But because it takes a while to earn trust and learn, we end up with a small sample that's difficult to repeat or verify, and we're still in danger of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency we all have to pay more attention and place more importance on anything that confirms your prior assumptions. So if you are prejudiced with a stereotype that girls are bad at math, then every time you see a girl struggling with math, you might say, yep, girls suck at math. While every time you see a boy struggling, if you remember it at all, you say, that individual guy sucks at math. If you want a much larger sample size of different kinds of data, and you need it in a hurry, you might learn from secondary analysis, or taking a new look at existing information. Durkheim compared research that had already been done for his suicide study, and you've probably done historical secondary analysis for research papers at school. For data on men and women driving, you might look at the arrest records of the Department of Transportation, which immediately challenges the old stereotype by showing that, among young drivers at least, men are getting in far more accidents than women. This is useful because it quickly and cheaply gives you a wide and varied view of a social issue, but on the other hand, limits you to the methods and potential biases of other researchers. With all methods, you have to be careful of selection bias, picking people or sources that push your conclusions unfairly in one direction. Active selection bias can happen because of our internal confirmation bias, such as watching Fox News because it more often confirms your conservative views, or MSNBC because it tends to confirm your more liberal views. It can also happen entirely by accident, such as typing biased keywords into a search online. Women bad driving gives very different results than men bad driving. Sometimes the best way to understand people's perspectives and lives is just to ask them in a survey. Surveys come in two basic types, and you've probably taken a questionnaire survey before. A simple list of questions that you answer by checking a box or writing in a short answer. The United States government does a massive one called a census every 10 years. Macrosociologists often use surveys to compare large groups in the population, as it gives a large sample of quantitative data. To find out about the driving habits between men and women, you could ask people what distracts them most. And you might find that while eating distracts men about twice as often as women, women are distracted almost 3 times as often by children in the car. What this doesn't tell us is why these are distracting and how detrimental they are to safe driving. The wording of a question may bias a response, or the multiple choice answers might not include all possibilities. To get more in-depth, micro-level sociologists might conduct interview surveys. Unlike an impersonal list of questions, interviews allow a researcher to talk directly to a subject and dig into people's responses, getting more personal, qualitative data, such as how nervous a person seems while answering. We have to be careful, though, for the Hawthorne effect, as our own behavior or even identity can bias a subject's response. For instance, talking to an interviewer of a different gender or ethnic background may make people hesitant to talk about issues of inequality. At best, interviews take time, so give a small sample, and we have to be careful not to overgeneralize. A truly representative sample should allow us to reliably say, in general, the larger population is like this. However, it's easy to assume data applies to more people in situations than is really valid. For instance, if you survey people at McDonald's about their favorite brand of French fries, you'd probably get a lot of people saying McDonald's makes their favorite. That sample is biased towards McDonald's, so saying people in general prefer McDonald's would be overgeneralizing. Surveys that are done well can be very useful, but when it comes to quantitative analysis, they tend to give more correlational data. So we see that women are more often distracted by kids. Our two variables, gender and distraction around kids, tend to go together. It does not tell us, though, what causes the distraction. Maybe something in the biology or gender roles of females make them pay more attention to kids, and that's what causes the distraction. Or maybe women's gender role simply leads them to have kids in the car more often. Correlation does not always mean causation. If you want to know how one variable causes another to change directly, you might do an experiment. Put people in an artificial, controlled environment and see how one change affects another. So you might take a random car and group of kids and have a bunch of men and women, the first variable, drive it around and see who's more often distracted, the second variable. If men and women on average are equally distracted, then it's a misleading correlation. Women have kids in the car more often, but being a woman doesn't cause you to be more distracted by kids. This type of experiment is difficult because you have to control for other variables to make sure the only difference being tested is gender, and of course protecting these kids from getting injured in a car accident. But social experiments have given us very useful data for understanding people's behavior. The Stanford prison study took a sample of college students and randomly assigned them the roles of guard or prisoner. With no other known differences between the groups than the ascribed status, we saw that their behavior changed dramatically between the groups, indicating that status itself seems to cause changes in individuals' behavior. But we have to be careful not to overgeneralize. Their behavior isn't necessarily representative of people in general. They may have acted differently, knowing they were being watched according to the Hawthorne effect, and the selection bias of only using white male Stanford students may show something different than putting a different group would have done. Finally, this study had to be shut down early because of fear for the students' safety. Because we research human subjects, there's a strict code of ethics social researchers must follow. The Stanford prison study was canceled because students were being subjected to cruelties and suffering emotional trauma. The Code of Research Ethics says we have to protect both the people involved in your study and the objectivity of your data and conclusions. People should be safe, both within the study and outside, so we have to keep their identities confidential, lest you, say, publish the complaints they had about their boss and get them fired, or worse. We also have to treat our subjects with respect, getting their consent to participate, and respecting their rights and time. To maximize objectivity and the reliability of our research, we need to be honest in our research and include all relevant data and potential biases, even those that go against our overall conclusions. This is probably the longest lecture of the semester, so thanks for getting through it with me. In the next module, you'll do a bit of your own research on the people and culture around you in your community.